Hi everybody, I'm going to talk about our lesson on fragmentation today. So remember that in Schoology you go here and then assignments. We're in week 2 and then this lesson is for Thursday and Friday of this week. And you'll click here. Here's our agenda. Remember you can find the things on the side here. So if you were absent, we watched this video on the artist Zemmer Peled. And we did a little activity that was in this thing called Nearpod, but if you were absent, you can skip that. If you're in class, obviously you already did that. So that was for the 9-3 date, okay? And then we're just going to continue the lesson on the hyperdoc for the next date, and we did not pick roles today. So you can find the document here or here. I'm going to do it in Schoology, but you can do it with the Google link right there. Either one works. So what we did is we watched the video, and if you were absent, you can skip this part because we already did that with the code and everything. I'm sure you could try it and it would work, or you could just email me your response if you're interested in. So a little bit about this artist. She would take pieces of pottery and she would cut them up, specifically porcelain, which is really fine white clay, and then she would fire them and glaze them and then rearrange them into an art piece. So our lesson is fragmentation in art, and the reason we're doing this is because we looked at sherds and how they're broken and how some archaeologists try to put them together to learn about a culture. And there are current artists that are studying fragmentation, and fragmentation is the process of fragmenting, or a state of being fragmented or broken. It also can be something that's not physical, like mental. So it can be the disintegration, collapse, or breakdown of norms of thought, behavior, or social relationship. So we want to consider the following. You don't have to answer this or turn this in. I just want you to think about it when I go through the slides. So this is going to be a little bit longer screencastify because the lesson was a little longer today. So you want to consider how the artist made the work. Look at the materials. In art, we call that medium. So instead of calling clay a material or art supply, we would call it a medium. Instead of calling paint an art supply, we'd call it a medium. Why do you think they use this medium or these materials? Do you think the medium effectively portrays the concept or theme of the work? So we did this as a whole group, so I'm going to do this slideshow example as a whole group with you and explain the lesson. And after that, then we started, we're going to start the actual class tomorrow. If you ever see this dialog box, just go here and it will open. It just doesn't like to look at the in Schoology. So we did this as the Nearpod, but don't worry if you weren't able to do that in class today. We got some great answers, but if you weren't able to, that's okay. So what we're going to talk about is fragmentation in art. And I just read you the definition, but it's here if you need it. So it's a really common thing in contemporary art. These are living artists. This one obviously is a painting, kind of looks like a puzzle piece. And then this is Chairman Mao, who was a dictator in China. And it is taking Chinese pottery and a Chinese technique where they repair, actually it's Japanese, work with kintsugi, and we'll learn more about that in the future. But it's taking things and breaking them, or taking them apart and then rearranging them in a new way. That's how most fragmentation is done. So I apologize for the blurry slides, but this is a fragment. There are many different meanings of these words and how they can be interpreted in art. And these are what we're going to be thinking about. What the word fragment means, some starting points to think about your process of making your art piece, discovering artists and designers that might inspire you, and then we'll share ideas with us tomorrow or Monday. So we looked at this word wall for what a fragment might be. So we really look carefully at this because what you want to think about is what you might want to do when you're creating the work. So are you going to think of shattering when you think of fragment, or a sherd? This is shard because it's for glass, sherd is for pottery. Are you going to think of a slice of something or a grain? One of the most famous pieces of art, or it's actually architecture that started with fragmentation, is the Guggenheim Museum. It's in New York. It's very, very fragmented in its building, and then the inside looks like this too. So it's a really beautiful piece of architecture, but some artists didn't like it because it's hard to hang up art on the walls in there. But the actual architecture is an art piece itself, just like our Denver Art Museum if you've ever been there. the new side of the museum. So we're going to look at 4 themes. So the main theme is fragmentation, and the next theme is people, environment, natural world, and man-made. Feel free to pause the video as you go to look more carefully at these, because I'll go through them relatively fast. So we're going to focus on people. So how do artists interpret fragmentation with people? So this is a photo. You're not required to make any of these pieces. This is just for inspiration. But if you do have a photo at home that you want to trace, or if you have a printed photo you could use, or a magazine photo, you might consider applying the fragmentation to these concepts. So this one, they layered in Photoshop trees with the images of the people. This artist's name is Chuck Close. He's very famous, and his artwork are giant portraits. These 2 are self-portraits. This one's a painting, and it's fragmented because he took apart all the little parts in the painting and did these shapes. If you were looked carefully at them, they're basically squares with ovals or other painted shapes in there to make the full picture. And this one, he took photos and enlarged them. These are both gigantic, taller than your wall probably, and then rearranged them to kind of feel broken or fragmented. And this was intentional. This one is done with layering and removing paint, so you don't have to focus right on the landscape, or in this case, the person here, the image. And then Da Vinci, he used fragmentation in his sketchbooks when he was studying the human body and human form, and so in this instance, the fetus and the infant. So it's not to be grotesque or anything. He did that to study for science, but it's also showing fragmentation in this sketchbook. More photography examples that show how things are fragmented or put back together after being taken apart and put back together in new ways. Again, this is something that would be like an advanced photo or a professional artist, but these are just to give you maybe some inspiration or ideas for something that you might consider for the work, because you may be able just to do a drawing, a quick drawing, instead of an actual like physical art piece. We'll talk about that more later. This artist did kind of like paper dolls or cutouts and then sewed them together. So you could do something as simple as cutting out shapes and then wondering, where are the fragments? Where are the missing people? Ron Mueck is an Australian artist. Here he is. And he makes these super hyper-realistic, in art we call it that, super or hyper-realistic art pieces. So they look real, like actual people, but then you can see the scale here is very, very small. So the fragmented part is that we are expecting it to be human and lifelike, but it's really tiny. This instance, this is humongous. She is very big, like 5 times the size of a regular human. You can't tell in this picture. But these are also not photographs. They're made of silicone and real human hair. Let's move on to environment, because that's another thing that artists explore when they explore big themes. So the environment here they used was portraits with maps on top of them. So it's kind of a combination of people and environment together. If you have an old map, or you could print one, you could use that, but always ask permission before you go and use things from your home. This one reminds me of the HUK, the clothing brand, because I've seen many t-shirts where they have floral designs on black shirts. And this one, the artist, and he says in his own words, is he's showing masculine and feminine together. We use the word juxtapose in modern art a lot, and that means to put 2 or more things together as a comparison or contrast. Robert Rauschenberg is a very famous artist. So he called his pieces assemblages because they're not collages. A collage, when you think of the word collage, it tends to be cut up magazines that kind of explore a subject. But his involve paint and other things too, and kind of make you think in a unique way. But it is definitely fragmented or deconstructed in a unique way. And then we have the natural world. So for the natural world, we have Andy Goldsworthy. He's famous for his outdoor work. So maybe when you're doing the activity, you go outside, but always be careful. Don't just carve or cut into things without permission. And of course, since we live in Colorado, I'm talking about the mountains here. So this artist cut up photographs and then rearranged them into a new way to make mountains. And then we have man-made. So this dress is actually broken pieces of pottery from China, and he used wire and leather cord to stitch it together to make an actual dress. And they were even worn by models. And they're in the collection of designers like Lacoste and Louis Vuitton. And so this artist was taking apart like china from his culture and putting it back together. And then this artist is an artist that lived in Hong Kong and then moved to the States, and then I think she's now living in Canada. And her work, she takes a pot and literally takes it apart and then puts it back together again. And then she's also fragmenting it because she's having this blue and white design that's very Eastern from her culture in Hong Kong, and then adding Western imagery like E.T. and Charlie Brown and the Abominable Snowman, kind of 80s imagery. Damien Hirst is an artist that lives in Great Britain, and he loves skulls. This one is obviously a painting where the skull is kind of either the butterflies are coming in or flying out. It's hard to tell, but it's fragmented. And then this one is actually Damien Hirst. They're real diamonds and real teeth on a replica of a skull. So the teeth are real, but this is a replica. So with these, this is not broken apart, but it's definitely fragmented because we're thinking about things in a totally new way. You would not think of real diamonds on a skull. And then this artist literally took everything they owned and put it and took it apart and arranged it in a new way. And finally, this artist literally took something apart. Always ask permission if you're going to do that. So think about fragments of materials. This is Book de Vries, and he took apart pieces and rearranged them in a very unique way. So they're fragments of materials, actual things, of composition, how the art things are arranged, and then fragments of coming together to create a single or unique piece. So your virtual journal prompt 3 is what we're going to do in class on Friday, and you're going to do this in class as an activity. So today, if you weren't in class, we're going to collect ideas as well as any art supplies we might use in the class. It could be a drawing. It could be something else. We'll talk about that in a sec. So you might look at a photo, a vase, a cup, a dress, something, any object carefully, and imagine what it would look like if you just found a fragment or a sherd of the pottery. The fragment, then what you're going to do is deconstruct it in a new way. And I said in a drawing, but you could also do an art piece as well. And then we're going to upload that image at the by the end of class tomorrow. And in your virtual journal or sketchbook, you'll type in the text box, how is the work fragmented? What does it mean to you? So please don't copy this exactly, but the idea here is a broken plate and then it's rearranged into a different shape. And it also has symbolic meaning, so you want to think about that too, the symbol of the heart, a broken heart and put back together again. So a lot of us are struggling a little bit with all the changes with school and other things in our lives. So that's where this idea came to me from fragmentation. It's been used in art a lot, but we were talking about sherds and how they were broken and they remind us of our culture. And this is hopefully a way to think about, even though something is broken, sometimes we can rearrange it and put it together again in a new way. So here are some ideas that you might do in class. We're going to actually spend most of Friday making these pieces. So if all you have is paper and pencil, that's fine. It can be a flat piece, like a two-dimensional drawing or cut up pictures that you arranged, or it could be a three-dimensional piece. So you can trace the object on paper and cut it up and put it together. If you're allowed, you can break something or cut up photos and put it back together in a new way. Always ask permission before you do that, and always do it in a safe manner. So if you were to break a cup that had a chip in it or something, you always want to do it in a safe manner. And you don't have to glue them together. That would be just kind of an art piece that maybe you wouldn't keep for a long time, more like performance art. Or if you actually have some things like wire or polymer clay or other things, you might use those supplies as well. So those are just a few ideas. So when you're ready to do your piece, you want to think of, how am I going to show fragmentation and how am I going to give it some symbolism or meaning? So that's the basic assignment, and I'll go over it more in class with you. For the hyperdoc, that's the exact same thing that I just talked about in the slide, just bigger. And then eventually we're going to share some of the art pieces in Google Meet or another forum. If you have a printer, you might decide to print and color some of these vase forms. If you don't have anything to color with, that's okay. And then you could cut them up and rearrange them in a new way. So that's something you could do for fun. Or if you really can't think of other ideas, maybe you could use this as your starting point. So I hope you guys really enjoy this lesson and learn a lot, and I will see you in class.